everyone, my name is Matej Kandrik and I'm director of Adapt Institute, Slovak security and defense policy-oriented think tank. Today we are taking you to High North and we will discuss the topic of how to secure the North, NATO response to Russian and Chinese Arctic ambitions. This episode is based on a policy paper published by my good colleague Michala Ružičková, who is aside being Adapt senior analytic, also director of infosecurity.sk, which is our key project in area of countering disinformation. Our second guest speaker is editor-in-chief in Adapt Institute, Matúš Jevčák. Michaela, Matúš, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Matej. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Michaela, let's start with you. Would you please start with basic facts, basic data of your paper? What was the topic about? What are your recommendations? And most importantly, what's the problem there?
Yeah, so our paper focuses mostly on the current trends and development in the Arctic security. So that is the basic topic. In the beginning, I would like to mention that when studying the Arctic, I tend to think about climate change as a threat multiplier. This is particularly important because nowadays it is evident that climate change has significant consequences in this part of the globe, and it is accelerating the melting of the ice sheets and caps, both on the sea and as well as continental sheets. According to the research that has been already conducted in the field, the Arctic is warming 2 or even 3 times faster in comparison to the global average. By mentioning this in the beginning, I just wanted to stress that this region is especially vulnerable to the warming of the global climate, and this is clearly the reason why several actors such as Russia, the US, and also China are trying to gain access or secure their positions in the Arctic. So the result of this is, first of all, the militarization of the region and the rising tensions between the Arctic states and between the Arctic and non-Arctic nations, in which several experts are already talking about the so-called renaissance of the Cold War era. So, as we argued in the paper, the region is really transforming now from the cooperative model to a more competitive or even a conflicting one. So, this is what we have covered in the paper, and I'm definitely thrilled to share my knowledge and findings within the podcast.
Thank you very much. Now, over to you, Matúš. What are your major takes on Michala's paper?
Well, first of all, Michaela, thank you very much for a wonderful introduction into the very important issue. I would like to start with a short summary of what's going on up there these days. I mean, after the Cold War, the Arctic nations aim to maintain a cooperative, low tension, and low abiding region in the Arctic. However, in the last decade or so, the rivalry among the United States, Russia, and China especially has brought about competitive dynamics and heightened tension in the Arctic geopolitical landscape. The outbreak of Russia's conflict in Ukraine in 2022 has notably impacted also the Arctic region. It led the 7 Arctic nations, excluding Russia, to halt most forms of collaboration with Moscow and prompted Finland and Sweden to seek NATO membership among other repercussions. Besides that, I want to talk a bit at the beginning about some common misconceptions that are often related to the region. And I have a feeling that the Arctic and the somehow growing tensions in the Arctic are often perceived as something that is related to a dispute over territory, which is actually not true. I mean, all the land borders between any of the 8 Arctic states, none of them is in dispute, actually. Last minor island dispute was actually between Denmark and Canada and was settled last year in 2022. There is a similar situation related to the maritime boundaries as such. I mean, almost every maritime boundary is agreed among the nations. Actually, the only one exception is a small part of the border between Canada and the United States. There are, however, some sovereignty related issues that are connected especially to the legal status of shipping through Canadian and Russian territorial waters. I mean, in our case, as the paper is focusing mostly on the tensions between the West or NATO on one side and Russia or China on the other, I mean, I would focus more on the Russian territorial waters. There is something that is called a Northern Sea Route that passes through some of Russia's most militarily sensitive areas. And this route is considered to become one of the most important maritime routes in the world, possibly. Uh, and there are, let's say, differences between the legal positions of Russia and, let's say, NATO on the legal status of this route. Russian law defines these straits, or the straits, or that route passes through some straits in Russian territorial waters, and Russia considered these straits as internal waters, while the United States and others consider them as an international strait, which is quite a huge difference actually, because then it depends whether it's a subject to the right of transit passage for the ships or not. So this might be a source of tensions also in the future, and it is also a source of tensions even nowadays. Another dispute that is likely to emerge over extended continental shelves in the Arctic. This issue might lead to a diplomatic spat and even be used in a larger power game between Russia and the West. It is not, despite what some argue, likely to be a primary driver of conflict between any of the Arctic states. What is quite interesting and important, I think, to mention is that in February of this year, 2023, the UN Commission actually approved most of the Russian claims involving these extended continental shelves. So it shows that even Russia was willing to spend a lot of energy and many years actually to battle these claims, not in a military sense or military way, but through legal and, let's say, diplomatic means in the international arena. I think that's enough for me as an introduction to the issue.
Thank you very much. It was really a rich and informative opening remarks from both of you. But let me take this discussion a little bit back, because I'm personally no expert on Arctic, and here in Central Europe, in Slovakia, we don't really spend that much time thinking about Arctic because it's so far away and it's simply not on our main map. So, Michaela, in simple terms, in simple terms for us who are not really into Arctic, why would you say, why is Arctic important, and what motivates regional and global powers? What are their interests in the region?
Actually, we have already covered some of the issues that are prevailing, but we can dive a little deeper. So we have already noted that the Arctic is thawing very quickly nowadays, and this has several significant consequences. So first of all, it is important to note that within summer months, the Arctic becomes more accessible, because the extent of the summer ice, particularly in late August and also in September, is so low that it enables a part of the maritime traffic to divert to these Arctic sea routes. Matusz already noted that there is the Northern Sea Route, but actually there are two such routes. So the Northern Sea Route is navigating the shipping above the Russian and the European territories, and the second one is the Northwest Passage above Alaska and the Canadian territories. Both these routes have several variations. I think within the Northwest Passage there are 7 such variations, depending on the ice sheet. And these routes both are still used only partly in the summer months or the summer period. And still there is the need to accompany these ships with the icebreakers. So we can see that not every state or the company can do this. But the use of these routes have several benefits. It is clear that it is a lot faster than using, for example, the Panama Strait or the Suez Canal. Also, the toll is not needed to pay, and no time is spending, of course, waiting to cross the strait. Unfortunately, I would say, this is only my personal opinion, but I would say that a major shift to maritime traffic to these northern sea routes could possibly increase some tensions between the Arctic states, which in some cases have some disputes. And not speaking about the potential environmental damage, of course. And there is also the second factor that is very important, speaking about the motivation of several states regarding their position in the Arctic. I would say that this is increasing their presence because of estimated rich deposits of oil or natural gas or metals or rare earths. So within some states, this could be a matter of maintaining their state security and economic growth, of course. So I would say that it is only logical to shift their attention to the Arctic and try to secure these valuable resources. There are also some other minor factors of the economical nature, but also of research value, as well as the power dimension, meaning mostly the power projection and demonstration. In the case of China, we can talk about exercising soft power.
All right, thank you. That was enough clarification for me. When I was reading your paper, I noticed you mentioned specifically hybrid influencing going on in the high north. Can you maybe give us some specific examples? What happened in history? What kind of cases we have recorded? Who was the perpetrator? Who was the victim? Give us some more details, please.
Yeah, in my opinion, we can pick Norway as the prime example for this, because the multiple hybrid threats seem to have been observed in this country recently, mostly speaking about the last year or 2022. Most likely, Russia is responsible for this because Russia is trying to gather information about the critical infrastructure in Norway, meaning mostly the communication infrastructure, but also military bases or airports. To be exact, picking some particular examples, there were several incidents taking place in late 2022. For example, some drones have flown over or around important parts of communication infrastructure, airports, or military facilities in Norway. Some drones have already overflown oil or gas facilities, and also there have been cases of illegal photographings of some facilities on Svalbard. So there was also an illegal Russian spy working under a fake identity as a researcher that was arrested in 2022. There is also electronic interference, particularly jamming of the GPS signal originating from Russia that has been taking place for several years now. And also some other worrying reports on cutting of fiber optic cables came from Norway. So, bearing this all in mind, we can see that Norway is really in the spotlight of the Russian hybrid influence, and therefore I would mark this country as a prime example. But however, with Finland and Sweden also being a NATO member states, we can anticipate similar trend regarding hybrid influence within these two states.
I see. Well, Russia certainly is important, if not one of the key actors in Arctic. What do we do? What do we know about the military buildup by Russia in the region? Approximately when it started, what kind of changes we observed, and what we believe might be the goals of increased Russian presence in the Arctic. Matusz.
Well, Russia has been gradually increasing its military presence in the Arctic over the past decade or so. I mean, the build-up began around the mid 2000s and has continued with various developments and changes in deployment. Russia, since 2008, has adopted a series of strategy documents outlining plans that call for, among other things, bolstering the country's Arctic military capabilities. And among other actions, Russia established a new Arctic Joint Strategic Command at Severomorsk, which is a home of the Russian Navy's Northern Fleet, upgraded the command to the full status of a military district in 2021, making it the country's fifth military district, reactivated and modernized Arctic military bases that fell into disuse with the end of the Cold War, assigned upgraded forces to those bases, and increased military exercises and training operations in the Arctic. I mean, among the last developments, we can mention the tests of new hypersonic missiles in the Arctic and also the commission of the two new submarines to the Pacific Fleet, as well as joint Russian and Chinese military exercise patrolling waters near Alaska.
Oh, that's very interesting. And adding the China in the picture, let me ask about that. What does China actually seek in the region, and what are Beijing position on the issues we are discussing, like the trade, energy, or rare metals or rare resources exploitation, and the militarization? Where is China in this Arctic picture?
Well, if it's a question for me, then it is quite necessary to mention that in its Arctic policy published in 2018, China proclaimed itself as a near Arctic state. And Beijing has long regarded the Arctic as a consequential to its strategic, economic, and environmental interests. China's Arctic activities nowadays are primarily economic, and it involves especially energy cooperation with Russia. As part of Beijing's effort to wean off coal dependence for power generation and to bolster energy security, in December 2019, I think it was, it inaugurated the 3,000 kilometer long Power of Siberia natural gas pipeline, which links Russia Siberian fields to northeast China. And it is also quite important to mention that Chinese companies also play key roles in the Arctic LNG 2, the second major natural gas project currently under development in the Russian Arctic. And besides the energy related issues, China's collaboration with Russia in the Arctic region is also closely connected to an establishment of a global transport corridor via the Northern Sea Route. Many experts actually believe that this route would be around 40% faster than the same journey via the Suez Canal, significantly slashing, of course, the fuel costs for the ships. And with global warming and the consequent opening up of more ice-free periods per year, the prospect of opening up international Arctic shipping via the northern route becomes, of course, brighter. Uh, when we are looking at this relationship between China and Russia involving the Arctic region, we can see that generally Russia, despite having this control over the region, Russia doesn't have the necessary financial resources or power to develop this route. So that's why China is the perfect partner to somehow build up the infrastructure in the region, like ports, terminals, logistical centers, etc. Besides that, China is also quite active in the Arctic in the area of scientific research. However, especially some experts from the United States are claiming that these scientific activities might be of dual use and they might also serve military purposes in the future, especially those I mean, examples involve, for example, the installations of various sensors, underwater technologies that are mapping the level of the sea, etc., etc.
Yeah, I can imagine that gathering data for research purposes is not that different than gathering data for intelligence purposes anywhere. But you mentioned the issue of resources and lack of resources, especially on the side of Russia. And that turned me to think more about the ongoing war, Russia-Ukrainian war. I guess there probably would be some impacts also on Russian plans and strategies employed in the Arctics. I guess the lack of resources is there, but Michaela, how would you assess the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the Russian plans and capabilities we see in Arctics?
Yeah, I think we can see several consequences of the war in Ukraine. I think the first is raising tensions between NATO and Russia. We may stress that NATO talks within the strategic concept that Russia is its most significant and also the most direct threat to allies' security. This was also meant in the light of the recent events in Eastern Europe, particularly the aggression against Ukraine. So we can see that this is worsening the relationships between Russia and NATO, and also including Sweden and Finland that joined the alliance, leaving Russia the only Arctic state that is outside of NATO. As we argued in our paper, there has also been a notable shift in the perception of Russia, resulting in reduced trust in its rational behavior within the international environment. Last but not least, I would mention the Arctic Council. We were not speaking about this so far, but the Arctic Council became quite dysfunctional after seven of its members, this means all Arctic states except Russia, suspended participation on official negotiations. The situation lasted until 2023 when Norway took over the chairmanship. So there have been several such important consequences, I would say.
Let me follow up directly with a question on Arctic Council. Can you give us more info on what kind of organization or institution it is? What's its agenda? How does it work? And why it's important in the context we are discussing?
Yeah, the Arctic Council is a intergovernmental forum that is promoting cooperation within the Arctic. It brings together 8 Arctic states, but it also establishes several work groups. It has the cooperation between indigenous peoples, and it has several observers, state and non-state. It was established in 1996 by the Ottawa Declaration, and it is enhancing international cooperation in several primary areas. I think these are scientific cooperation, but also oil pollution preparedness and response. And the third one is maritime search and rescue. As we can see or conclude, the cooperation is mostly provided within the non military areas, as the Ottawa Declaration clearly sets the condition that the organization should not focus on military issues, although it can serve as some kind of a platform for a dialogue between the nations, the Arctic nations. And it can possibly ease some tensions between them. However, after the war in Ukraine, I've already mentioned that the Arctic Council became dysfunctional to a significant level, and we are not sure, or experts within the field are not sure whether it can maintain its position in the future, or maybe there is some kind of need for establishing a new kind of organization that would maybe focus more on the military issues or kind of a diplomatic matters.
I would just like to add that despite the fact that the Arctic Council is definitely the most prominent of all these organizations, or let's call it forums, that are dealing with the Arctic region, it is definitely not the only one that is focusing on the region. And despite the fact that it has become dysfunctional because all the other members actually severed relations with Russia due to the invasion of Ukraine, they are still continuing in keeping bilateral relations with the country involving the developments in the Arctic region. And of course, there are many international, let's call it, agreements that are also dealing with the region. So despite the fact that the Arctic Council is really the most prominent one, it's not the only one. And there is much more going on the bilateral relations.
Thank you for that. For, I guess, understandable reasons, Arctic Council is omitting the military area, but we have one very important organization, which is, of course, the NATO, for which military issues and military questions is the daily bread. So, discussing all the Russian rising capabilities in the past and their strategy and their changing posture in Arctics, what was the NATO reaction and what was the reaction by individual member states, if any?
If I may, I think it's safe to say that with the increased hybrid influence and, of course, with the already mentioned war in Ukraine, NATO and its Arctic allies as individuals also are kind of shifting their attention, and they are trying to change their stances. And they are calling for trying to ease the Russian position in the region, mostly bearing in mind the militarization and these threats. So I would maybe mention one case when the new NATO strategic concept labels Russia as the most direct threat. I was already speaking about that. And there are several more diplomatic responses. For example, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has called for more investment in the Arctic within his visit to Canada in August 2022. And this was in reaction to reopening of Soviet-era military sites, which Matusz already covered in one of his responses. And Canada, which was basically one of the more cautious states regarding Russia, may shift its position in the coming years, and I would say that it may bring more investment and attention to the Arctic military buildup. Alongside this, I would say that the response is more on the individual level or at the level of individual member states of NATO, mostly within the United States, which recognizes Russia as a threat to its military interests.
I think that Michaela wrapped the answer pretty well. I just want to add that there are also two, let's say, practical steps that the NATO has been taking since Russia decided to improve its military capabilities in the region, and those two involved enhanced military presence by the NATO. As an example, are various naval, land, and air exercises in the Arctic region, involving also countries such as Finland, for example, but also Great Britain, etc., etc. And the second one is the improvement of infrastructure and capability in the area. That means that NATO members have invested in enhancing infrastructure and capabilities in the Arctic, such as improving military bases, deploying advanced surveillance systems, developing specialized equipment for the Arctic conditions. So we can see that actually there is a direct response also in this way.
Thank you both. Maybe just on the couple of ending notes to wrap it up here together. In Central Europe, we certainly are not speaking and thinking about the High North, the Arctic region too much. So what would you be your key ideas or key recommendations what should be done and why it's important for also for us, for our future, for our economic prosperity, for the potential of the development in the future.
Well, I think that we somehow answered at least partially this question at the beginning, and I would come back to your actually first answer, if I'm not question, if I'm not mistaken, and that was like, why is the Arctic important for us at all? And I mean, the answer or involves things like geopolitical importance, also natural resources, also uh, maritime routes, etc., etc. So the problem is, as I can see it nowadays, that both sides, and by that I mean NATO and Russia, sees the development in the region as threatening. I mean, even Russia, and coming back to your other question, is when you asked about the effect of the war in Ukraine on Russia and the military buildup of Russia in the Arctic. The result is that I think the Russia, at least 80% of the Russian forces were withdrawn from this area to support the war in Ukraine. Uh, this led to a feeling in Moscow that the balance of power in the Arctic is so not in favor of Russia that it is necessary to do some steps to somehow uh, balance this disadvantage. And Russia, in its strategic documents that were published this year, in its new laws involving the Arctic region, definitely showed that it perceived Arctic and as one of the most important regions for its security, for its future, and decided to invest even more energy, finances, and let's say military capabilities to improve the defenses in the region. On the other hand, it is quite obvious that the reaction of NATO is very similar in some sense, and it is to increase the military presence to balance the Russian new Russian capabilities. So it is definitely important to keep the dialogue with Russia in some sense in the region. As I said at the beginning, uh, all the tensions that we can see or perceive in the Arctic region are not only a result of what's going on in the region itself, but they're a result of a global increasing global competition between Russia and the United States or China. So if we want to decrease the tensions, it is definitely necessary to find some space for the dialogue. Whether it will be the Arctic Council, whether it will be something else, I think Russia is still showing some kind of willingness to use the Arctic Council in the future. However, we cannot completely disregard the option that they will decide to leave the council completely, as it happened with the other forum that is dealing with the region, and that's a Barents Euro Arctic Council. Russia decided to leave this year, if I'm not mistaken. So there is definitely a need to find a some forum for a dialogue to somehow decrease the tensions in the region, because the region is important not only for the Arctic countries but also for the other players that are not directly geographically located there.
Yeah, I completely agree on what have been said. I also think that these raising tensions between Russia and the Arctic NATO members and the NATO as itself should not be overlooked, because it is also the topic that is important for European countries and for the West itself, of course. And also, what I would pick as my closing remark is what should be maybe looked at closely is already mentioned cooperation between Russia and China, which is manifested also in joint military exercises. I don't know, the sale of Russian weaponry to China, as well as the joint development of defense equipment and such issues. So that is also very important that Russia is, shifting its attention more towards Asia, and it's increasing its cooperation with Asia states, mostly the China. So that is very important to note.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Indeed, the region seems full of developing dynamics, as the other parts of the world, but this being in a way under discussed, I think we did a good thing and that we went through it. Michaela and Mateusz, thank you both very much for joining me today for the discussion.
Thank you, Matej.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
And dear listeners, this is actually the last episode of AWR Atlantic podcast for this year. Me and whole our team, with both our speakers, we wish you Merry Christmas, enjoy your holidays, and stay safe.